What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 389. We got a fun show tonight. We have a very special guest coming to us all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. He doesn't live there, but he's currently waiting for his bike. He still has a lot of travel ahead of him to get back to the Pacific Northwest. But our guest tonight, Gavin Woody, is going to be joining us to chat all about the race that he just completed called the Iditarod Trail Invitational, which is a 350-ish mile ride. And I say ride because he rode his fat bike the 310-ish miles. We'll talk about why it's 310 and not 350. This is the same race that he ran in 2018. He decided to do away with the feet and use the wheels this time around. And there's going to be some stories, I'm sure of it. Sounds like an amazing adventure. We're excited to have Gavin on the show tonight. Sit back, relax. Sit back, relax, everybody. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a great show. Ginger Runner Live begins now. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 389. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy Tuesdays to spend a little bit of it with us. We have a big show lined up tonight. A wonderful guest, Gavin Woody, will be joining us. He is going to be broadcasting from Anchorage, Alaska, which is, he's in Alaska right now because he just completed the Iditarod Trail Invitational, which is a 350-mile trail run, bike ride, or ski. And he has done 2 of the 3, I believe. We'll find out more about this particular adventure. He just finished the bike ride on his fat bike. The thing is massive and super heavy, and he had a hell of an adventure. And we're going to chat to him all about that on tonight's show. But before we introduce our guest, I'd like to introduce the wonderful Kim. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ginger Runner Live. As always, we are live. If you're new here, pop in the chat, say hi. If you have questions for a wonderful guest, you can also ask them there.
Yes, one of the beautiful parts of being live is that if you have a question during the conversation, ask it in the chat. Kim will be able to pull it aside. We also like to recognize members of our community, our GR crew. It is because of them that we're able to do this show live every single Tuesday, as well as our reviews, our daily live shows, our films. Everything is because of our GR crew. We're so thankful for them. Every member of the crew. If you would like to join the crew and be a part of this amazing group of runners from around the world, you can do so by heading on over to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. That's it. There's a bunch of tiers you can choose from, and it supports us, and we have really great tiers to offer. Really great perks to offer all of the tiers. And we have an after show tonight with Gavin as well. That's one of the perks which we're excited about. Also, we just want to point out at the top of the show here that the Barkley Marathons has started. We'll talk about it on tonight's show because our guest, Gavin, also got to participate in the Barkley in 2019. I say participate. I hear him laughing.
Gavin got to participate.
He got a finisher's medal. Yeah, he got a ribbon. Gavin can share some of those stories tonight, but I feel like we'll probably start the show chatting about that because it's in the midst, right? We've had some reports that there's already runners on their second loop. They're just blazing through. But Gavin has firsthand experience of what this race is and what the course is like, and we'll chat with him about that. So without further ado, let us introduce our wonderful guest tonight, coming to us all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. It is the wonderful Gavin Woody.
Yay!
How are you, friend?
Hey, good. It's been a while. Thanks for having me.
I know. We often refer to you as our favorite adventurer because I feel like anytime, even if you're just doing a neighborhood run or something, like if you post a photo, it just looks like you like got some crazy adventure in or something. And then often we see stories that you traveled to some far off destination and you did, like a 200-mile just fun adventure over here, and then a 350-mile fat bike ride in Alaska over here. I would like to kind of start the show with that discussion on adventure and how you personally are drawn to it and what beckons you the most when you choose what you do? Because it seems like you do some really amazing stuff quite often. So what draws Gavin?
Yeah, I like to learn. I think I'm just naturally curious. And so, whether that's like on a professional level, trying to make myself better there, or as a father, and then specifically on the adventure side, just going out and kind of being a newbie and just having to figure it out. And so, adventure, if the outcome is certain, then it's not really an adventure. So yeah, that's what kind of draws me, and I like learning new stuff, really, and that's kind of why I wanted to tackle this on a bike this time, which we can get into. But yeah, whether it's backcountry skiing or rock climbing or running, I like to put more tools in the toolkit, I guess.
I think that's a really cool way to look at it. And we also love following your adventure runs because you also participate in those multi-sport style events that traverse long distances through through various mediums of travel, whether that's sea kayak or mountain biking. And, last time we've had you on the show, I remember you chatting about a race in New Zealand that I think you did that's
God's
just bonkers. So I love the idea that it's because you want to learn and you want to get better at these different disciplines. In this case, let's briefly chat about Alaska, and then we'll talk about Barkley because I know we'll just want to get that out of the way up top. With Alaska and the bike, having done this course before, this race before, on foot, why did you want to go back on the bike? In my brain, it seems like it would almost be easier or less of a challenge for you, but I'm guessing that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was kind of a last minute thing that or kind of spur of the moment thing that I was able to apply and get in. And I've been biking more over the past couple of years as I've been doing these adventure races. And I have some, kind of like, I don't set big goals, but or I don't have like this really rigorous like goal planning thing, but I have these kind of big things that are kind of sitting way off in the horizon. Mm-hmm. And so I'm constantly looking at like, what are some other incremental things that I could do to try to build up. And basically my kind of guiding principle is everything is training for the next thing. Like no one thing is like the end all be all. Like no matter if this thing goes well or goes poorly, it's just going to be, a good experience to then reflect back on later on.
Yeah.
And so as I've been biking more these adventure races, and I did a big expedition race last year in Expedition Oregon, 5-day deal, and then did a number of 24-hour adventure races kind of all over the country last year, and did well in some of them. Just biking is like fun. And I'm also, I've done a lot of long runs, I don't know how many 200s or definitely a lot of hundreds and beyond. So I've done a lot, and, it's taken its toll on the body. And so I think, especially on the knees and stuff like that. So I just think like, what are ways to kind of diversify so that I can keep, my body healthy, so I can keep chasing after my kids as they get older and faster than me. I also, like I said, I love to learn, and to be honest, I love gear. And so putting together this fat bike, I mean, I spent way more time probably putting this thing together than actually riding it. I think I rode it 6 times before. And it's been a struggle because, with all these supply chain challenges with COVID, and then specifically in these little niche things, like a bike packing bag that is wide enough to fit within like this special frame, like this stuff, the lead time is super long. So it was going to be a challenge, not just for the physical part of it, but also just, can I then, get all the stuff that I had towed behind me in a sled last time, a 40 pounds, sled. Can I get all this stuff on a bike to then support me, across, all kinds of conditions in Alaska? So that was kind of the genesis of it.
I love it because I think what it sort of shows is just because you can do one thing doesn't necessarily mean that the next thing you do is going to be as easy or the same. And I love that you're diversifying with the sports here as well, talking specifically about longevity, because I think that's a topic of conversation we bring up on the show a lot. Kim and I, as we get older, we want to look back and go, I ran every day for my whole adult life, not just I was only able to run in my 30s or my 40s and then I had to taper off. Like, we are looking at how can we continue to diversify our sport, our bodies, and get that same passion out of it, right? And I don't know, I'm really excited to kind of dig into this race particularly, and gear. I mean, I'm already like tell me every detail about the bike. I want to figure out every little nuance.
It's really trying to piece together a bike during all the supply chain issues. Like I know that you've kind of been browsing gravel bikes. It's been like
Gavin, actually, I reached out to Gavin, 2 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, and was like, hey, I'm looking at gravel bikes. I need some input. And Gavin's like, I'm on it. And Gavin, like every bike that I've looked at is gone, like not available, hasn't been available. And I'm like, oh, I should have pre-ordered that one. I'll just wait for the next one. And then that comes along. I'm like, oh, I'm going to pre-order it. And it's already sold out. So I'll feel your pain. I do want to dig a quick bit into Barkley. So the Barkley started today. You have spent time on the course. There's so many ways to refer to
recreated in
recreated in the area,
participated,
known as Frozen Head. So for you, what was your experience like? Because I don't think we have had you on the show since your attempt.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if we talked after Big. So, I mean, a little backstory. I mean, I'd been applying to Barkley, I think, 6 years or something.
Right.
And could never get on Laz's radar until I went to Big's backyard. This is, I forget when, maybe it might have been 2018, actually.
Yeah.
And so, if for those of you folks who aren't familiar, or most people are probably because they've gotten a lot of attention, but you basically run a 4.1 mile loop around Laz's, the creator of Barkley, his backyard, until nobody else is there, until there's one person left standing. And so, so long story short, let me do the quick thing on there, and then it gets the lead into Barkley. So, and I'd run, a fair amount of hundreds, and then, these big 200 milers like Tour de Giants, it's 200 miles in Italy, 80,000 feet of climbing. It's absolutely nuts. I think I'd run the spine race at that time. I'd done a lot of, long 200s and these longer things. But, doing loops was not something that I think I thought I would do well on.
Right.
And so, but, I figured I'd go out there and used to go to Tennessee and, hang out with Laz and his dogs and stuff like that. So next thing I know, we're like, I don't know, 65 hours in. And I look around and it's Johan Steen, who's been to Barkley a number of times, who won Big's Backyard basically kind of twice. So like, this champion kind of runner guy, Courtney DeWalter, ultra runner of the year, I mean, who doesn't Courtney? And then me. And I'm like, what? And so then next thing I know, then I'm totally pooped, and I'm just not a real road runner because you run on the road at night. And so I couldn't make a lap. And so I pooped out at like 270 miles, so gave it a pretty good shot. And then
no big deal.
And then, and then Courtney and Johan ran another lap together, and then Courtney turned to Johan and said, peace out. And then Johan took his victory lap. So it was a super cool experience, and just something that, I'd say I remember all of it. I actually remember very little of it, but it's that part I will remember for a long time. So that then I got on Laz's radar, and he let me into Barkley the next year. So, so then I trained a lot, and I mean, went from, this like crazy, kind of relatively flat loop race to just doing a ton of elevation, gain. And one of the things that, I mean, you guys will appreciate in the Pacific Northwest is I went out and I went and did cable line a number of different ways. One time I went and did cable line. So this is in Tiger Mountain. It's a local mountain that's like a 2,000 foot climb. And so I did cable line, but I did it like 10 feet over to the side off the trail.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So just because, it's nasty, and that actually
crazy.
Yeah. Just to, be off trail, because Barkley is is legit off trail. So, and then I did it, what did I do? 15 laps or something, to like do 30,000 feet of climbing, just one night.
We often talk about that, Gavin. You don't know this, but to all of our friends, and we include cable line in our current Tiger Claw course. And anytime we describe cable line, we describe it as there's a local legend, Gavin Woody, who's done it 15 times. So while you're climbing up, just remember that someone's done it a lot more than you. I didn't know that you did it 10 feet off just because it's so gnarly and like, there's not brambles, but it's ferns, it's dense,
just deadfall and all that.
Deadfall, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You struggle. So anyway, I'm leading up to kind of Barkley. So I wanted to, I kind of knew what I was getting into. So I really wanted to train well. and then ultimately went out there and did basically a loop and a half. And ironically, the thing that got me was weather. So I pushed hard on the first loop, and I was really worried about the navigation, because you think like, that's what you hear about, I can't find books and things like that. So I was actually super dialed on navigation. And, in hindsight, like, I've been a pretty good navigator. I used to be an Army officer. I was an Army Airborne Ranger, and, we did a lot of navigation there. I was a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. So, it's been like kind of knowing where I am, and, space is generally important to me. So that actually went well, but it's hard. It's super, just off trail for the vast majority of it. And, super steep up, super steep down. So pushed hard. It was relatively warm the first lap, got dehydrated, but kind of worked my way back in and felt pretty good coming into the second aid station, the first lap. And then my wife and sister were there to take care of me. And I knew that weather was going to come in, but I figured that I'd be pushing so hard that I could get away with my lightweight rain gear. I lightweight pants, like jacket, lighter gloves, and got out there, and it started just sleeting. And, there's like almost that 32 degrees where it should be snowing, but it's like, it's raining. Like, that's the worst condition. And that's what happened. And so I was actually with a group of people, and people just started peeling off and going back. And, at some point I'm trying to like find a book, I'm ripping the page out, trying to like, get my numb fingers to, cinch my backpack down. And the problem, the lesson learned, this is where, I learn stuff all the time. And what I learned is that on really steep terrain, when you're tired, you actually can't generate enough body heat to stay warm, especially when it's super muddy and slippery and stuff like that. And so, because a lot of times that's what you do. Like, if you're cold, you just go faster and heat up. But in that terrain, I couldn't do that. And so I just got super cold. And so basically at the point, I could have gone farther, but it would have been going into basically no man's land, and to basically complete the full loop. And so I bailed. So I'm just trying to be, save it for the next time. So it was I love the experience.
I was going to ask, like, despite the fact, a loop and a half, which is still, let's be honest, not a marathon. It is far beyond that, and truly a life experience, I'm sure. But I was wondering if you were still drawn to the event, if it's still something that's on your radar, and would you ever consider going back and talking to Laz, or going to Backyard and giving it another shot?
Yeah, I would like to. I think the likelihood that I'd get in again is pretty low, to be honest. I think that, so I would love to go back. I just don't know, one, if the stars would align to where I could go. And I'm also, like, I had a great experience. I would love to go back and do better, but there's also other things that I'm super excited about and passionate about. Sure. So, that's kind of how, I don't know, I'm such a dabbler that I'm just kind of excited about so many other opportunities.
It's also wild that it would be the weather, because you live in the Northwest. You also have done races like the ITI that you just finished, the 350-mile through Alaska wilderness, which is snow, ice. I'm sure you had a little bit of everything. So it's not like you're unfamiliar with weather. It's just how crazy how gear and body heat could literally lead to the decision of, like, I can't. It would be unsafe for me to continue on and get further from safety, really.
No, when I saw Jamil come in, as he's been out there like, half a dozen times, whatever, he came in like full, like rain, like ski suit, like big and stuff. Like, this dude, I should have watched what he was taking. Who knew,
Yeah.
So anyway, no, but hey, that's, and I just take it. So it's funny. I'm wearing this shirt today because Good. I don't know if you know this, the Good video thing. I highly recommend it. So Jocko Willink, he's a kind of a former Navy SEAL, and he has like a podcast and stuff like that. But my sister and brother-in-law told me about this little video, and it's like 2 minutes long. But what he talks about is when things go wrong, good, because I'm going to learn from that experience. And so, I also, that's kind of core to my ethos, right? Is that when, don't think of these things as failure, just think of them as like, another little piece of the puzzle to put in the, in there for next time.
I like that mentality. when things go, all these things that go wrong, lessons to learn, things that we can pull from it, things that we can distill down for next time and execute better or more efficiently. I am curious, are you following Barkley this year? So are you looking at the weather reports? Are you kind of all in on like, let's see how fast John can do it and like all that sort of stuff?
I'm not super into it. I mean, I've been seeing the Instagram posts and stuff like that and saw who's out there, which is cool because there are some folks that, yes, I mean, these are friends, that are out there tackling it and stuff. So, yeah. And, and I got to spend time with Harvey out at Biggs this year, and that he actually convinced me to go. And I don't know Harvey very well. I ran into him in an airport a few, I don't know, months ago or something. And I was not going to go back to Biggs because I just wasn't really trained, and there was work stuff and all this other stuff. And he's like, dude, you should come. And so I'm like, okay. And then he sends me this, like, literally there's like in Facebook Messenger, like a page of like fireworks emojis that he sent when I said I was going to go. He sent me like a page of fire. He must hit the firework button like 80,000 times.
That's awesome.
He's just such a good dude. So I'm super rooting for Harvey because he is just a phenomenal human being. And for those of you guys who haven't listened to his Rich Roll podcast, I really recommend it. He's such a great guy.
Yeah, and that one came out pretty recently too, and I remember seeing that and just really happy that Harvey's getting the attention he deserves. And it's funny, the story that I most recently remember as well is him barely being able to make it to the start line of the 100-miler in Florida and like having to hitch a ride and rent a car or something, and he just showed up and he crushed it. He did what Harvey does. I do want to start transitioning into the ITI talk, which is the Iditarod Trail Invitational, which Gavin Woody just completed on a bike, which is pretty exceptional. But of course, before we do, we have live questions. If you have any questions for Gavin, whether that's around Barkley or his training or his races that he's done before or the ITI, drop them into the chat. Kim will pull them aside. Kim, what do we got?
A question from Junior King. They ask, hello from Cornwall, New York. As a U.S. military academy graduate, what in your adventures brings you most back to your years as a cadet?
That's a good one. Probably Sandhurst. So I did this. It was kind of like an intramural, like you could play like football or soccer or something, or this thing called Sandhurst, which is basically like infantry training. So it would culminate in an event where you would like put on a gas mask and then take it off inside a certain period of time, and then take it off and get blasted by CS gas, and then you'd have to go do like a first aid station, and then you go do a run, and then you do an obstacle course where you're like using a fake bayonet to stab little targets and stuff. So anyway, it's this like big thing, and so it's a big adventure basically to kind of utilizing all of the infantry skills. And there's like a marksmanship thing, so you have to shoot your rifle. So that's what, again, it's cool because it's kind of multi-sport, and so and you're in the mud, and it's cold and all that stuff. So we basically a group of cadets would train for this, and then the Sandhurst Academy in the UK would come over, and we'd have these international teams compete against each other. So that was always super fun. And that's what I was. Like I said, I went to I became an infantry officer, and then did the airborne school, ranger school, and then was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Italy. And they actually just deployed to Latvia, and as part of this Ukrainian response. And so I spent a couple of years there, and then we parachuted into Iraq at the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and spent a couple of years there.
I remember chatting with you a little bit on, I think the last time you were on the show, about your history in the infantry and your experience and how it has translated to adventure, and also how adventure helps you utilize those skills in a way that's, I don't know, kind of, I forget the term you used, but it felt like you were being able to be creative with it. You can choose your lines, choose your routes, your races, and you get to use these disciplines that you learned and became proficient at. And it's such an amazing skill set that you have that has allowed you to do these just incredible adventures. ITI, for example. So this is an event, and helps set the stage for us, because I'm actually quite curious. ITI, when we talked to you about it before, the Iditarod Trail Invitational, you had run it, and I remember the story of you finishing and then going back out, right? Is this the same event that you went back out to help someone?
Well, so what happened was so I was running with this guy, Dave Johnson, who has won it. I think he'd won it 5 times before. And I caught up to him about like, I don't know, probably mile 50 or something. And so we ended up, and we were in second place together. And there was a guy ahead of us, this guy named Scott, who was pushing really hard. And so we'd get to an aid station and he'd have already like left. And their aid station, they're basically these lodges out in the middle of nowhere where they're accessible either by plane or snowmobile in the winter. In the summer, there are these nice cabins and things like that. So, and that's kind of the crazy thing about the race too, is you're in like literally the middle of nowhere, and then you'll come up on like a little lodge, like at one point there's a hunting lodge on a lake, and like a float plane a plane on skis that comes in. And then you can get breakfast and all this stuff. So it's just kind of crazy that you're not just like eating, like moose dung out there. So anyway, so Dave and I were behind this guy, and we were moving along and pushing, but we were trying to sleep at these different spots. And we get to the final like aid station. It's this like really rundown old school in this town. And Scott had already left because he saw us on the live tracker and saw that we were coming in. And so he took off with no sleep. And so Dave and I just said, like, good for him. That's great. He's going to keep, trucking along. And, like, good on him. But we need to get some sleep because we're just hammered. Yeah. So we slept like 3 hours. We got up and we start moving. And next thing we know, and it's 50 miles before the last checkpoint or before the finish. And about, 20 miles in, we come up on this guy who's standing there in the middle of the trail, and it's Scott with a sled. And he's just kind of standing there and like, hey man, like, what's going on? He's like, well, I'm trying to figure out what to do. And we just thought he was really tired and he was going to bivvy. So we talked to him for a while and wanted to make sure that he was warm, he was comfortable, and we just thought he was ready to pull out his, we all carried, big sleeping bags and survival gear, stoves and stuff like that. So we said, well, like, okay, well, we're going to go, and so we took off. And then from that point, we were running scared. We figured he'd perk right back up and, it was going to be right on our tail. So we get to the finish, we're celebrating. And we look on to see where Scott is, and his tracker was stationary. Like, okay, great. He stopped. He bivvied, no problem. A biker comes through after us, and we said, hey, how's Scott looking? And he said, well, we saw his sled, but no Scott. So he'd unhooked himself from the sled and was basically like, where was Scott? So they organized a rescue. But I mean, this race, they call it Trail Invitational. Like, you have to be invited to it. There's no required gear. There's no like, here's your packing list. Yeah. Check your, do you have, your taped seams, UTMB style. There's none of that. You could literally just walk out the door with nothing and they'd be like, okay, there you go. Wow. But because they know the people that are doing this thing, should know what they're doing. So anyway, which meant they didn't have just like a rescue ready to go. So they finally figured it out. They cobbled one together and they got snowmobiles out there and found him. He'd spent the night basically just walking around in the woods and was able to stay warm enough. But it was scary. It was really scary. It was, and I may have talked about it before, but it was a good wake up call that you push yourself so hard to the edge in some of these things. And like, what is that tipping point, to where you can't make good decisions. And so it's something that, we need to recognize. I mean, whether that's pushing yourself too close to the edge from a sleep standpoint, or I do a lot of backcountry skiing. I'm on the board of the Northwest Avalanche Center, and similarly in avalanche terrain, it just so happens that the funnest slopes to go ski are the ones that are most prone to avalanche. And so what's that tipping point between this is fun, this is dangerous, and finding that balance? It's not easy.
I think I remember the story. I remember you mentioning that on the show, and it made my jaw drop, really, to imagine that this is a race, yes, invitational. So they're picking people who clearly have the experience, the knowledge, the know-how. to handle themselves in adverse situations, because I'm sure this course can throw anything at anybody at any given time. So I remember that story, and it made me think when I saw that you were doing this event again. You posted on Instagram at the start line in Alaska. I was like, oh man, he's going back this time with the bike. This is crazy. It made me think, like, how did you approach going back to this event with those experiences from before? Maybe differently, or with more awareness or caution? Was that even in your lexicon at that point, or is it just, for the adventure?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I really just, I mean, wanted to finish. I'm not, I wouldn't really consider myself a biker. I mean, I've been doing more of it, and and I didn't really push too hard, because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Everybody always asks, well, what's next? Well, the logical thing, there could be 2 logical paths here. Well, maybe 3. Never come back to Alaska, since I'm coming back. The second one would be try to ski it, right? To try to do the trifecta, and very few people have done that. In fact, the first woman to ever have done it, Amber Beth, she just did it this time, so super cool. And that's really hard. And actually, skiing supposedly is the hardest discipline, because it's just, it can be just staying warm, and then the gear's challenging. Anyway, the other path would be to try to go all 1,000 miles up to Nome. So that's the thing. This is the 350. This is kind of the baby race, whereas there are still like 10 people out on the trail. So from where we finish at the 350 mark in McGrath, there's another 650 miles all the way to Nome. And so that's super burly. And so that's intriguing to me. Also, that's like a month of my life that,
right.
Would be, I'd miss like, some good chunk of my kids' life, miss my wife, miss work. So that there's just some like just structural things that make that challenging right now, but it is intriguing, just because that's super far, and and at that point you get super deep. There's not like the breakfast burritos that just pop out of thin air on that trail. That for me, that's what's exciting though. There's always something harder, there's always something cooler to go and tease me for the next time.
I think that's why I actually really like talking to you too, Gavin. One, I can only imagine the number of stories that you have that we don't get to chat about in the hour that we sit with you. But at the same point, you do so much different things, and you always know that there's a challenge bigger than what you just did, but that rather than intimidate you, that excites you. And I like talking to you, because I feel also excited to take I'm already thinking, I want to do 15 laps of cable line, 10 feet off trail. I want to go 15 feet off trail. But I'm thinking like, okay, there's 1,000-mile version of this.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I can't wait to see you finish. Like, I can't wait to hear about that story. Is it the full Iditarod trail? Sorry.
It is. Yeah. It's what the dogs do. And what's cool is the dogs. So I was also really thankful to bring my family up here. They were on winter break, and so I have a 7-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter, and we were able to come up with a family and go dog sledding and go ice fishing, and saw a bunch of cool animals and everything. And we saw the start of the kind of the ceremonial start of the Iditarod. I mean, essentially, it was a little bit different, but saw all the dogs, and it was super cool. And so, and now they are on the trail, and so they're following the same trail. And they're going to pass those folks who are still on the 1,000-mile journey. And supposedly that's like the best part of that 1,000 miles, is finally being able to see other humans, because
another human,
you're so spread out. I mean, that was what's crazy about this race for me. I mean, within the first 10 minutes, I was by myself. Like, you just get super spread out really quickly, and that was. And it kind of goes back to, you ask about like, well, why the bike, and, why do it again? And I just want, I had an amazing experience last time. I mean, Dave and I, we had such a fun time, and we were like singing Garth Brooks songs and drinking little bottles of tequila on the trail. That's a whole other set of stories, but we actually, ran most of it together. And so this time, not that it was deliberate, because if there had been somebody there that I could have ridden with, I probably would have. But it didn't happen. And so I did basically the whole thing myself. And so that was, again, another kind of just confidence builder for me, that I can be out here, pretty strung out, but I can, I can start my stove, I can boil water, I can just, I can handle myself in some, pretty, tough conditions. We had for a lot of it, the trail was actually super smooth. And so again, take a step back, right? It's this on Iditarod Trail, which is basically a connector, kind of like think of a snow machine highway between different towns. And that Iditarod Trail was formed as part of actually a really cool story about a diphtheria epidemic in Nome, Alaska, way back in the day. It's a super cool story. There's a book I just actually finished on the trail called The Cruelest Miles, and it was basically a relay to get this pandemic medicine from Anchorage all the way up to this, place way out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of winter where boats couldn't go. So it's actually got so many parallels with like COVID and stuff like that. But this town was basically, it was killing like all these kids in this town, and they were going to like wonder that could we fly in a plane with the medicine? But that was, these are still very early days with planes. And so they were like, we got to get the dogs. And so they like did this relay. And it's an amazing story. I'm just like getting goosebumps because it's such a cool story of these dogs and how they really saved this town. So that's why the Iditarod Trail race was formed as kind of a tribute to these mushers who did this relay to go save the kids in the town. So it's pretty cool. So it's this highway, kind of this ribbon of snow that that is traveled by snow machines and moose, it turns out, when everything else is really soft. So that was one of the things. So we'd be on this like super smooth trail, and I was coming down from this high point called Rainy Pass. You go through the Alaska Range, and there's avalanche debris, and it's a little bit interesting. And but I'm just like flying down this trail, and all of a sudden there's just like this basketball size hole in the middle of the trail, and it was a moose print. And so the moose, it's been so warm here in Alaska that the moose have been really upset because it's been so soft on the sides that they've been on the trails. And there've actually been a number of instances where they attacked a dog team. There's been some other run-ins. And so people are really apprehensive about the moose being on the trail right now. So I saw quite a few moose out there, but I saw mostly their footprints actually destroying the trail, which was a little frustrating.
Oh man. I think you posted a video on your Instagram of moose like basically evading you, trying to get we don't want to fuck with Gavin, we know this guy. That your story actually about the origins of it reminded me of the movie that a couple of years ago called Togo, which is it's a Disney movie, but it's about the dog that I think was a part of one of those relay stretches or something.
Totally.
Amazing. But then you read the actual story about Togo and you're like, holy crap, like this story is ridiculous. It's insane. It's amazing. I can't wait to read the book. What is the name of that book again?
Cruelest Miles.
The Cruelest Miles. Okay. I'm going to put that into my library. Kim, you've been so patient. You have tons of questions from the live show here for Gavin. Please get away.
Question from Vivian in the chat room. Vivian says, Gavin, I know there are many points when you were likely alone during those periods. What did you do to either distract or motivate yourself to keep moving forward?
Well, actually, Dave, I used a little trick Dave taught me on the trail last time, was use Smarties. And so, the Smarties candies. So I got really at this low point in this place called The Burn, and it's this big kind of burned area. And so he gave me some Smarties last time. And so I took literally the bag that he had given me that I hadn't finished, and I took those on the trail. And so when I got really tired, I pulled out the Smarties and thought about, just let them melt in my mouth, and that kept me going for 5 minutes. But at that point, it is more like a 5 minute by 5 minute thing. And I don't know. I'm just always thinking about trying to anticipate, I guess. Right? Am my toes getting a little cold? Like, don't wait for a problem to happen. Like, mitigate the problem. Anticipate the problem, get ahead of it. So put the toe warmers in before they get too cold. Get the hand warmers in. Get food in regularly. So really, it's funny how food works on these super long things, because it seems like you just ate and all of a sudden it's half an hour later and like, I have to eat again. But you just have to be deliberate and stay on top of eating and drinking. So to be honest, that's what I think about a lot. I think about, like how to, keep myself, eating contest. And moisture management, I guess I would say, is just, not being too hot or too cold. And I learned that kind of the hard way on the first night. I had put too heavy of a jacket on, kind of overheated and got super cold. So, you know, it was good lesson learned. So yeah, and I didn't really, I listened to some podcasts and, like I said, finished this book and stuff like that. So, but my phone was kind of not working, and I mean, my watch stopped working. I mean, the cold just affects stuff, you know, just really whacks it out. So I couldn't really count on anything. So,
That kind of reminded me, when you're running long distances, 100 miles. I mean, I think anyone who can relate to these longer ultras and 100 miles and beyond and stuff, I look back and I remember long swaths of time where everything kind of mushes together. Like there's 6 hours that I didn't black out, but I just don't really remember the 6 hours because it's just so monotonous. In something like this, 350 miles, you know, multiple days, are there large swaths of time that you're just sort of like, oh yeah, and then those 12 hours, I don't really remember much happening?
yeah. You know, I remember this one pretty well because I actually slept a fair amount. I didn't want to put, again, I didn't want to have to get rescued, right? That's like the number one thing. Like I want to take care of myself. And so going into this, I didn't know how my bike would perform. I mean, I'd ridden it half a dozen times, not ideal, and you know, it's loaded down. It weighed 75 pounds. You know, that's a lot of stuff that could fall off, you know, and then once they got into these snowmobile ruts, I mean, the fact that my bike just didn't explode, I was just having this vision of like, I hit the snowmobile ruts, my bike literally just explodes, you know, and I'm gonna have to walk for 50 miles, but it didn't. And part of it was because I was deliberate ahead of time about making sure that I knew how it was, you know, all structured and packed and so yeah, I actually remember quite a bit. And so because I also was deliberate about trying to sleep at these different checkpoints.
Sure.
And so I would typically get like you know, sometimes 30 minutes. I think my longest sleep was 2 hours. I think I slept total 10 hours over the 4 days, essentially, which is pretty good. I mean, I have slept less than that.
Yeah.
I think when I ran the John Muir Trail by myself solo, I think I slept 3 hours over 4 days,
Jeez.
which is not recommended. I'm sure I did fewer days because of that.
Yeah. I want to get to one more question here.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Then we'll ask about gear because I'm dying to know about the bike.
Yeah, question from John in the chat room. John asked, what were you most concerned about going into ITI? What actually ended up being the biggest issues?
Yeah, it's funny. So everybody was talking about overflow. So it had been, like I said, been so warm in Alaska that there were all these reports of overflow. And what that is when the lakes or rivers freeze, but then the ice sinks and it pushes up water into the sides of the river, basically through the cracks. And it's crazy because it doesn't freeze, even though it can be below freezing, but it doesn't freeze. It's just kind of sitting there in this like slushy mix, and it's sometimes hard to see. And so you'd be, you know, so the danger is you go through it and all of a sudden, you know, a tire goes in or a foot goes in. And then as you extract that, it hits the cold air, you know, with a little bit of wind, and it just instantly freezes. And so that's like the big scare. And it's taken lots of people out in the past because, like, I had a buddy who, you know, you drop a rear tire in there with your derailleur, and his derailleur just became, you know, this like frozen chunk.
Oh,
and so that's what I was so worried about. And because it was going to start to get colder, which we thought would be good, but it may be this transition period where it would be, you know, just still slushy, but then cold enough to freeze. So it turned out that, so I took these waders. They're called like literally like hip waders, but they're kind of lightweight hip waders called Wiggy's waders. It's this very niche little piece of gear. I also took trash compactor bags as a backup, and I basically shoe glued these big massive mountaineering gaiters to my bike shoes. So I was kind of triple protected. And it turned out that there was overflow, but it was easy to kind of get around. And there were some stream crossings, and I didn't use the waders. I just walked through them and stuff. So that was all fine. So anyway, that's you know, we were all like, oh my gosh, should we take pack rafts out there? Haha. No, that was fine. Now, what was actually then the challenging part were all the snowmobile ruts. Again, because it had been so cold, so warm, as these snowmobiles went through the trail, they created these huge ruts. Think of like like what is it, wash bars on
Oh yeah, a washboard on like a fire road or
washboards.
potholes or
You know,
something.
and they just get worse and worse and worse, right? Because
Yeah.
you're kind of you're accelerating over the bump and then coming
Right.
down on the other side, and so they just get increasingly worse. And there's actually a 2,000-mile snowmobile race that goes through the same trail. It's called the Iron Dog, and so they'd all blazed through there and just created these monster bumps. And so
Oh,
it was literally just, I don't even know, 40, 50 miles of these just like crazy. Think of like you go into a CrossFit gym and there's those boxes that you like jump up on. It was basically like, think of those with maybe slightly rounded edges. And it was basically like 40 miles of those things. Just
oh
going,
my God. That's not, I mean, that sounds miserable. I mean, it's hard enough on foot, but let alone on a bike where you're kind of hoping for the smoothest ride you can get, right?
yeah, it was, so that was, like that was a gut check. Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
because I knew that section, how far we had to go. Cause that was another like probably 40 miles into Nikolai. And so I'm like, well, I guess we're doing this.
I mean, yeah, you got to commit, right? It's either commit and just push through, or it's stop and call it quits. And I don't know. You don't seem like the type to call it quits for a couple of bumps. I do want to talk about gear. So we're talking about the bike here because you are obviously we know you as a runner, as an adventurer, but also multi-sport disciplines. In this case, this race sounds like you can go about it in 3 different ways, whether you're running, biking, or skiing, all of which, though, use some sort of mechanical equipment, whether it's a sleigh that you're pulling behind you, the skis and that sort of gear. The bike seems like the most mechanical and most potentially problematic. So how did you choose your gear, and why did you choose what you chose, and how did it work out?
Yeah, so I reached out to a friend. He's actually also a veteran who owns a company called Yak. They make these very niche little products specifically for bike packing. And I was like, hey, Joe, like, you got any advice? And he literally sends me this list of like, here's all the stuff to get. I'm like, thank you. And then so he hooked me up with this guy who'd built up some bikes for him in Colorado. And so basically, work through kind of the spec list. But yeah, I ended up with a titanium frame bike. It's called a Y Big Iron. And it's kind of designed for this stuff. So it actually has a low triangle. If you look at the pictures, some people would say like, oh, but you have a small triangle where you can't fit a lot of stuff in that middle triangle piece in the bike frame. But because you're getting on and off the bike so much, you have more flexibility. Because if you, the thing about snow, right, is that once you step off on the side, a lot of times you're going to sink down. And so it's just harder to get on and off. And so that low standover height was really important. The second thing was titanium. It's like a slight weight penalty to carbon, but it's way more durable. And again, out here, like an extra half a pound in the frame is way worth it because you're low, that's like such a small percentage of the total weight once you throw on all this other stuff. Sure. So anyway, so that was kind of the core. And then like these super fat, 5-inch wide tires with these special carbon rims. So, I mean, I went all in and it'll be fun to use this thing even on just dirt trails and stuff like that. But then there's all the other, then there's a sleeping bag, which sat on a rear rack. I had panniers on the back, which that's where I put like my puffy jacket and extra food and extra clothes and stuff like that. And then I had my these cages essentially on the fork, and that's where I kept my waders and some more extra food down there. And then underneath my handlebar, I had my sleeping pad, and then my big bike pogies. A pogie, if it's not a hoagie, it's not a sandwich. It's basically linked with like a little sleeping bag for your hands.
Yeah.
So you put your hands in there and it keeps them warm. So I just wore just lightweight wool liners the whole time, but I just shoved them in these, little sleeping bags for my hands.
Are they heated? Are they battery operated, the pokies?
No, it's just like a big
really insulated.
And, it's people think, oh, well, heck, can you get your hand out if you need to, if you fall? And it's easy to get your hand out. In fact, I bought some for my kids because it's really hard, like for little kids to get their, hands.
Little frozen fingers around the bars.
Anyway, I think I'm kind of a gear nerd, so I can go into more detail. But at the high level, I wanted reliability out there,
right?
Because the other interesting thing, just for it's kind of technical, but was lighting system. So I actually had a hub built into the front wheel, which generated electricity for then a light up front, so I didn't have to carry extra batteries. I carried a headlamp just as a backup, and if something else went wrong, but that was my primary light source, and that was wonderful.
And that is something you can get off the shelf, or is that like a custom design thing that you got, or is that a product that
it's these guys in Australia. It's called K-Light. So I'm sure they sell 30 lights a year or something, but
right.
they probably
super
won't.
niche, but obviously works. It sounds like it's perfect.
It works great. Yeah.
All in, what do you think your bike weighed? Because that's a whole other probably part of this equation, right?
Yeah, it was probably 75 all in with loaded up for food, and then for water I carried a Camelback, so I had a base layer, carried a Camelback with a tube and tube cover, and then I'd put a jacket over. So that's the thing, I had to buy like new. I had them from last time, but I bought like one size larger jackets so they could actually fit over that Camelback.
Right.
And so they protected it from, one, I didn't have to take it on and off. Two, it protected it if it got really cold. And it got down to like, I think -5 one night, which wasn't super cold. I think it got to like -40 with wind chill when I was there last time. So it wasn't super cold. Most of the time it was probably around the kind of the 10-15 degree mark, which was actually pretty comfortable because then you're not sweating. So that was pretty nice. So yeah, Camelback. And then I had another thermos that I'd fill up with, make hot water, or have hot water and, coffee and hot chocolate and stuff like that.
And so I'm also a gearhead, so I hear about all this gear. I'm like, oh man, it sounds like a lot, having to deal with a lot, but also it sounds like it requires a lot of practice, training, getting in and out of the packs, trying to be efficient with everything, packing and all that stuff. How much time did you actually have to train with all the equipment all in, or were you able to at all?
Yeah, I did. I kind of pieced it together because I didn't actually get my frame bag until I think 2 weeks before, or maybe a week before. So it was tight. And I started this process back in October, trying to get it all together. And even my bike didn't come for a long time because they were waiting on the crank arms. They had the whole thing together, but just the cranks were trying to come in. So I did one full shakeout. It went up to Snoqualmie Pass in the middle of the night. It was like freezing rain, which was perfect. And just, went out for, I think, a 30-mile ride, and then, pulled all my stuff out and got in my bag, and, just wanted to test out all the systems because, small things can really matter, that if people, they may assume that that's going to work, but, what if like your bivy sack in your sleeping bag, what if the zippers are opposite?
Right.
Yeah.
Until you, and we used to do this in the Army, if we were going to go do a live fire exercise, we would do a walkthrough with, no ammunition, then and just literally walk through it. And then we would do it with blank ammunition. And then we would do it with live ammunition. And then we would turn around and do it at night. And then we would do it with walkthrough, then blank, then live, right? So you keep you're stepping your way through. And again, it's just training for the next thing. So don't assume gear is going to work until you really put it through its paces.
I'm glad you got some time in with it, because I would imagine it would be
in the perfect freezing rain conditions.
Yeah, in perfect freezing rain conditions, like really putting it to the test. Because I'd imagine, that's a really bad circumstance to find yourself out in the Alaskan wilderness amongst moose that don't like you, and have something fail and something catastrophic.
Or have something like small that's just irritating.
Yeah, like the irritating thing. Yeah, Aaron, any irritating things that really bug you since you were alone out there? I'm sure you're alone with your thoughts.
But so I rode. So this is where I'm really like, when you're like, oh, what does it mean to be a biker? I think literally having like, the undercarriage, in shape is probably the number one attribute of a biker. But yeah, that hurt a lot. And mostly going over all those bumps, it's not like you're just like, like triathlon, you're like in, I used to do Ironmans, and, you're in one position and you can, you're fine. This, was very dynamic and really, just rubbed a lot of things. And so I think I stood for that last 50-mile section, I probably stood like 10 miles of it. I was just like, just out of the saddle, jumping away.
Man.
Down.
I feel bad for you, because it's hard enough doing like a couple hours on Zwift sometimes, but that's nothing. That's nothing compared to, I'm sure, what you had to deal with multiple days out there. All in, how many days did it take you?
A little under 4 days. which I was happy. I mean, I had packed for like 5.5 days. So it was, I was happy with that. And, I was happy that I was the first non-Alaskan or Canadian. There was one Canadian guy ahead. And everybody else were these Alaskan guys. So that's the thing for their bike. We talked about my bike not being here. They don't care. They're just going to drive down from like their house and pick up their bike on Wednesday.
Right.
Whereas I've been stuck here since, for a while. So yeah, I'm waiting in Anchorage because we had talked about it before the show, but my bike, there was basically a cargo plane that was supposed to come make 3 trips a week, bringing these bicycles back. Cause the passengers, we fly out in a little tiny, kind of, so 1 seat on each side, this little tiny plane out of McGrath. And then the bikes were supposed to come frequently, but while we were racing, apparently the cargo carrier just said, "Oh no, we're not going into McGrath anymore." And so then they had to wait, and they're going to do one big cargo shipment. But it is kind of the Wild West out here, and it reminds me actually of my time in the Army when I was in Iraq. The Iraqis would always say "Inshallah," which meant God willing, and so it meant time was kind of malleable, and it feels like it's kind of that way here. It's like, well, we'll see what happens. So you just got to deal with it.
You'll get your bike when you get it.
I love the experience up here.
We also have a lot of friends that live near where you are. So for some reason you need to bounce and your bike just arrives like the day after you have to bounce or something, we can figure out ways to get your gear to you, of course.
I've been so busy working. Honestly, I'm back like trying to dig myself out of email hell, and so it's whether I work here or in my home office, it's the same, so it's no big deal.
I imagine that's also part of the reason you enjoy these long expenditures out in the wilderness is because you're able to leave. I mean, you're out there alone, just yourself, and you don't really have to worry about work stress and stuff like that. That probably doesn't really follow you, right?
No, I didn't get look at a single email. I couldn't look at a single email.
You couldn't.
Which is great. Yeah. No, and I really did want, to be out and just experiencing it. Yeah, and you would see the other competitors at the different checkpoints and things like that. And that's what has also been fun, honestly, being here. It's, I always think of things happen for a reason, a blessing in disguise. And I've been able to be here and see some friends who've completed the trail and just spending time with people who've done the same thing. There's nothing like it because you've shared this experience that is so different than anything else that you can, you really, you can share that experience. Whereas if you haven't completed it, it's just hard to get across what that means. So that's been pretty cool to stay up here.
Well, we appreciate you also.
Family to get back home.
Yeah, what was cool is we did get to see that you posted pictures and stuff like that. Your family was able to at least see you off near the start line, and it was awesome. It's always cool to see how much you involve your family and your kids and everything that you do. It really is special, man, and we appreciate you sharing your story of this race with us. I'll kind of end it here. I'm curious what you'll be able to distill down from this particular experience. What is it about the ITI 350 on a bike that you'll carry with you into the next adventure? Because we know you'll have plenty upcoming.
Well, there's one story that I didn't tell, and that apparently I didn't tell my wife until I posted on Instagram, which she loves hearing stuff from through Instagram or Facebook or through other people. She loves that. So she doesn't really love that. So I'm going out. So I'm going out of Rome.
We have your wife on the line. Let's just bring her here now. Sorry, go for it.
No, Sarah. No, she is. I mean, I'm so lucky to have Sarah and supporting me. She actually right before the start. So it's a quick story. So right before the start, I'm like walking around on this ice, and I look down, and some of the studs in my because you screw basically hex screws into the bottom of your boots to stay stable on the ice, and some of it had come out, and so I asked her, and she's sitting there like screwing these hex screws into the bottom of my boots right at the 30 seconds before the start. So just so grateful for her. So anyway, I'm cruising. So back to the story. So I'm cruising out of Roan, which is this very remote checkpoint. It's like mile 200 or something, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And as you exit there, you get on this river and you're cruising across this thing. And it was 2 a.m., no moon, super dark. And you can't see, you just see ice everywhere.
Oh my
And
God.
so I'm cruising on this thing. And then there were actually like these gravel sections, which I'd walk across, but I couldn't see any tracks or anything. And I'm by myself. And so I've got my GPS, my Garmin, I'm, watching where the line is, but it's micro terrain. Like, I mean, I'm generally in the area, but am I really in the area? And so I'm cruising on this stuff, cruising. I mean, it is just glass. And I've got studded tires, which I felt good about, but it's still like, you hope you don't slip. And so I'm cruising, and all of a sudden I hear, and it starts cracking, and it just like all of a sudden like sinks a little bit.
Oh,
And so
God.
I like stop and I back up, and it's just cracking. Now I'm not super worried because I knew it was shallow at that point because there was so much gravel around, but I really didn't want to punch in at all. And so it turned out that it was just kind of a superficial layer. It was kind of aerated, and I could see where on the other side of the trail I could go. So anyway, I got through there, but it was just, for me, that was the thing I hadn't experienced before. And so it was just a lesson learned that if you're to be careful on ice. And so that was my biggest takeaway from that whole thing, that, I try to be safe in these different endeavors. And luckily, I got out of that one safely, but that was definitely an eye-opening experience out there in the middle of the night.
Be safe on ice. Oh,
Also, I
don't
understand why
die.
Sarah's like, I don't really necessarily want to find that out on the internet.
Yeah. I'm sure Sarah's very much like, please just tell me next time. Tell me in
I
person.
thought I told her. See, I talked to her the night after, and I swear I told her, but I was also delirious. So anyway.
Yeah. For how long? How many days does it take for you to recover from something like this? Like from the delirium, the sleep deprivation, food, all that.
Yeah, this took a lot out of me. Like, I feel like for some reason biking takes more. You say like, is this easier, running hard? I mean, it actually is condition dependent. I mean, there's some years that the walkers go faster than the bikers because of deep snow. Because if you're pushing a 75-pound bike, it's actually easier to drag a sled. So it just turned out that the conditions were pretty good. But yeah, it took a couple of days for my knees still kind of hurt just because torquing so much on these bumps. But yeah, like a couple of days, and then get back into the routine.
Well, we can't wait to continue to follow your adventures, man. We appreciate you sharing some of the stories tonight and just some of your experience and adventure. Can you remind people who are watching live where they can find you on social, where we can continue to see these amazing pictures of your adventures and follow along with the journey?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I try to post on Instagram and Facebook. I'm I think Gavin Woody on Instagram, and the same thing with Facebook. I always joke my mother-in-law took Love Lighthouses as her handle, so I couldn't take that one. So I just had to go with Gavin Woody.
We love it. Our wonderful guest tonight, Gavin Woody, makes us laugh, inspires us, and just gives us some sense of adventure that maybe we don't get to experience on a regular basis. We just appreciate everything that he does for the sport and helping us see that it is more than just running and that there's so much more out there to see, to do. Our guest tonight, Gavin Woody. We're going to move right into our after show with Gavin for our Patreon subscribers. If you would like to join us there, all you got to do is there it is. The little lower third will pop up there. Head on over to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. You can join us for all of our after shows. There's lots of perks depending on what tier you're on. We'd love to have you. But of course, we like to end these episodes of Ginger Runner Live by recognizing members of the community who go above and beyond. We call it our GR Crew Member of the Week. Kim, who is this week's GR Crew Member?
This week's GR Crew Member of the Week is Crispin.
Yes.
Crispin was lucky enough to get into Western States via lottery this year. And Crispin wrote in saying, back in December, I injured myself and have been quite worried about my build up to Western States. But this past weekend ran way too cool 50K just as part of training in just under 5 hours. No big deal. No issues.
Well
Way
done.
to go.
Well
Welcome
done,
back.
Crispin. Welcome back. We are excited to follow his journey to Western States. He's been dreaming of that one for a long time, and he's an amazing crew member. So we appreciate him, and congratulations. That is going to wrap up episode 389 of Ginger Runner Live with our wonderful guest, Gavin Woody. We're going to move right into the after show. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tonight. We appreciate you. Get out there, train hard, race harder, and party the hardest. I know I am. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Ginger runners.